I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.
Today's interview is with Denny Gillem, who is a career Army officer who served a couple of tours in Vietnam. This interview is going to be a little bit different from our usual format in that we already have an interview in the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project collection with Denny, but it has this hole in it at the middle part of his career, including much of his second tour in Vietnam. So what we're going to do here today is kind of put in a little bit of background on the early part of his military career, and then go in and focus more specifically on what he did kind of in, let's see, I guess 1966 to into 68?
Yes.
Yeah, both in the States and over in Vietnam. So just, can you give us a kind of a quick rundown on sort of the early part of your military career? So you went to West Point.
I went to West Point. I had 2 years of college. I was trying to get into West Point. It took me my third time was a charm. I was just reviewing with some of my West Point classmates. While we were there, in 4 years, we had 4 electives, 2 junior year and 2 senior year, 1 each semester. Other than that, we were engineering majors. I mean, you could pick your foreign language. I was sort of an engineer background in my college, so that did okay. And I had 2 years of college that gave me credit for 1 class, American history, so I was able to take another elective.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I did pretty well. I like to say that I graduated at the very top of the bottom third of my class. So I was not a superstar by any chance, but it really molded me. I knew I liked the Army. I was high school ROTC, college ROTC one of the years, and it really molded me, and it set the values that are still me. The duty, honor, country, the importance of integrity, those kind of things. I guess they were in there somewhere, but it certainly drew it out and molded me, and the sense of duty, that it really did mold me. I was greatly influenced by one of my tactical officers who influenced me strongly in a direction I thought I wanted to go anyway, which was to go into the infantry branch. I got my first choice, but typically infantry is the largest branch, and typically the people who can't get what they want end up in the infantry. So therefore, the fact that I wanted what I would have gotten helped.
Yeah. Now, what year did you finish West Point?
I graduated in 1964.
Okay.
With a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. Actually, that was the first year they wasn't a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. It was just a Bachelor of Science, but all we took was engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, they disconnected that. You know, academicians, there's no reason why they do things, they just do. But that was the story there. Went there, got 30 days graduation leave. From there, I reported to Fort Benning, Georgia, Airborne School. Had to do a little helping some of the units while I waited for Ranger School to start.
Mm-hmm. And they had an infantry school there too, right? That's the main part of what you're doing there.
Is the infantry school. We had an interesting thing. Our year and the year following, the Mother Army, for whatever her great wisdom, decided that we West Point graduates were not going to go to our branch basic course. So there was an infantry officer basic course which everybody went to, mm-hmm. except us. We were going to get OJT. Now, for those of us who were in infantry, since almost all basic training, infantry, West Point, everything is sort of infantry oriented, mm-hmm. and the fact that we went to Ranger School was not optional for us. We had to go, part of the OJT kind of thing,
yep.
which for me was wonderful. It didn't bother me. The guys who went Signal Corps or Air Defense Artillery, they were sort of in a strain, but it survived. Went to Airborne.
Did they do the Ranger School at Fort Benning?
Yes,
okay.
It has always been at Fort Benning.
Because there were, I mean, I know that they did some training. Some of the training got done in places like the Okefenokee Swamp for some people. Dahlonega up in North Georgia.
Okay, yes. The Ranger School headquarters is at Fort Benning, and there are 3 camps. The main camp where the first 3 weeks is at Fort Benning. Then Dahlonega in Georgia is the mountain phase. That's the next 3 weeks. The final 3 weeks is the swamps
Okay.
around Eglin Air Force Base. During my 4 years at West Point, in football, I never saw Army beat Navy. We never won. So my first year out, I was in swamp phase of Ranger School when the game was played, because it was played over Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving Saturday. Well, we were still in Ranger School. There was no time off of that. And we had just come in from a long, wet, nasty patrol. I don't remember how many days it was. And they trucked us in, and we got into camp after dark, cleaned up our stuff, hit the bag. The next day was Army-Navy game. Almost all my Ranger School classmates were West Point classmates, just because there were so many of us available at one time. There were maybe, I don't know, 100, 120 in the class, and probably all but 10 of them were. Well, 5 of us made it into the day room to watch the Army-Navy game. All of us slept through most of it. But that was the first time I saw Army beat Navy. The second time was the next year on my honeymoon. But that's jumping ahead.
All right. So you finished basically at the end of 1964. You finished the training.
Yes.
And
I graduated from Ranger School just before Christmas.
All right. And then you went to Colorado next.
Yep. Took some leave. Reported to Fort Carson, Colorado, for my first duty station, 2nd Battalion, 11th Infantry, where I was a platoon leader. And it was mechanized infantry platoon. Well, I didn't know an awful lot about mechanized. It's easy enough to learn if you have a platoon sergeant that'll teach you. And I had an incredible platoon sergeant. This guy had been in the Army end of World War II into Korea. He went to Korea as a master sergeant, which at that time was the highest ranking sergeant. He was a prisoner. He was captured for about a year, repatriated at the end of World War II, or end of Korea, decided after a year or so to get out. Got out, got a civilian job, got married. After about a year and a half or 2 years of being in a civilian job, he decided, this is not for me. I need to go back in the Army. Told his wife that. She said, I'll be here. You go do whatever you want to do. When you come home, I'll be here. So he joined the Army. They brought him back as an E2, private. Well, he had worked his way up to E6, which platoon sergeant was an E7 position, but they didn't have any E7s. So he was living in the barracks with the troops, and he was my platoon sergeant. Well, to say that Sergeant Easley knew the Army is an understatement. And he was available 24/7. I was a bachelor, and he was a geographical bachelor. I got as good a training as any new second lieutenant could ever get.
Yeah, and in your original interview, it seemed that sort of repeated itself, because when you got to Vietnam as a platoon leader, you had a whole bunch of senior NCOs with the right level of experience in training and background. And so, for the young officer to walk into that, and especially if he's smart enough to pay attention to what the NCOs have to say, that's got to be a godsend.
It's a godsend, but the pressure to perform, being in school is cool, doing all this studying is cool, going through Ranger School is cool. Now all of a sudden, the ball is in my court, and looking for mentors. Occasionally there's a second lieutenant stupid enough not to listen, and occasionally there's a second lieutenant who listens, but listens to a jerk sergeant. But how do you know? But for the most part, all of us grow because the sergeants train us.
Right. Now in your case, at the beginning of '65, Americans have not yet sent kind of ground forces. The Army hasn't put ground forces into Vietnam in combat situations. There's advisors and some support units over there, but you're not infantry or whatever. Nope. But once we do, you started lobbying right away to get over there, or did you even lobby before we got over there?
Well, I think we sent in the 173rd Airborne Brigade somewhere in like April. I think that was the first. But President Johnson made the decision that we were going to put forces, but the decision was made. And I think they got there in June. Well, I applied in like May for assignment to Vietnam. I was a second lieutenant, and there were no all advisor positions were first lieutenant positions or higher. So I got thank you very much, but no thanks. And the next month I got orders because the Army had then decided to send 3 brigades, 173rd Airborne, the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division, and the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division. And I was the first officer replacement to the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. They told me go to Travis Air Force Base, get on a plane. I did. They flew us over. We got off. I didn't know what to do. You go over here, you go over there, replacement center kind of stuff. I didn't have any idea where I was going or what I was going to do, but that's often the case when you're in a replacement center.
Right. And in the original interview, you kind of go into a fair amount of detail about your experiences there. You're a platoon leader. You're operating kind of in the area outside of Saigon for the most part at that point, and not an area that has really substantial enemy activity at that point. It's sort of smaller scale VC stuff at that point.
Yes. The fighting, while it was not that intense, and it was usually small unit, individual kind of thing. Still scary when that first bullet comes at you.
Yep. Yeah, because you kind of described sort of that situation being under fire for the first time very well in that first round. You spend, and now the pattern for officers in Vietnam was to rotate them around, and so you wouldn't normally, you'd have a year's tour, but only at most half of that normally would be with a combat unit.
That was very typical. That was very typical. In order to get combat experience in the field for the soldiers, and also to have some experienced people, so routinely start in the field and go up to, but again, whatever happened, but that was typically the rotation, and that's what happened to me. In my particular case, my company commander, Phil Pryor, was a great guy. He was a West Pointer, like myself, 3 years older than I am, I don't remember, fairly senior captain, and I enjoyed working for him. He was a good guy. And we got a new commanding general in the division, and Phil got selected to be his aide. I don't know what the process was. He just did. But we knew and liked each other. We stayed in touch. And at one point, several months after he went up there, we communicated. I don't have any idea how we did. He may have just been in the area, or I don't remember, because we didn't have cell phones and text messages and stuff like that. But he said there was a new one-star general coming into the division, and I asked, since I knew I was going to go in somewhere, any chance I could have a shot at the aides job. And long story short, yes. Exactly how that worked, I don't know, or if I did know, I've forgotten.
Well, part of it was that he had wanted a West Pointer, or at least that was what you had noted in the
General Hollingsworth was a Texas A&M grad. He had taught at West Point, and he had decided he wanted a West Pointer as his aide. And though I was taller than he, which is very atypical for aides, we interviewed, and he hired me on the spot, which delighted me.
Now, was he assistant commander of the division, or was he brigade commander? Or
he was division, at least at that point, and I can't speak 100% accurately today, had a major general commander and 2 one-star brigadier general assistant commanders.
All right.
And he was one of the assistant commanders. There were, he came in when he was the third one, but one was getting ready to leave for whatever purpose. So after a couple of weeks, he was the guy.
Yeah. And so working with him, it sort of exposed you to sort of a whole other side of what the Army was doing over there.
I had no clue of the things that I would be exposed to by working with him. He was an amazing man, and yes, all of a sudden the worm's eye view didn't compare at all to the bird's eye view, but that's the purpose, I think, of the whole concept, is to let you see what's going on, and I did.
If you had been given the choice initially, would you have stayed in the field?
Yes, if I could have stayed as a platoon leader or a company commander, but the probability was very strong that I was going to be on somebody's staff.
Yeah, but that was just how they did it. Yeah.
I was with all due modesty, I was a darn good rifle platoon leader, and I liked my platoon. They liked me. We worked well together. If I could have stayed there, yes, I would have, but there was no question that I was not going to.
Right. What was the sort of mix of personnel that you had in that platoon? What kind of guys were these? Where were they from? That kind of thing.
As a general statement, everybody was one rank too junior for themselves. The platoon sergeant was an E6, he should have been an E7. The squad leaders were mostly E5s, which is an E6 position. A couple of them were E6s, but they were, again, I came into it when the 1st Division was told they were going to deploy a brigade. They took all 3 brigades and made one real good one with everybody the right rank, and that's what deployed. So as we mentioned before, my first platoon sergeant was an E7, a very senior one with all kinds of experience, and the couple of weeks that we worked together, he really showed me the ropes. Then when he got promoted to, I don't remember what, maybe first sergeant, an E6 moved in. So they were, for the most, the sergeants were experienced sergeants. They had been in the Army 5, 6, 7 years. Well, none of them had been in combat. They certainly knew the Army, and they had been in combat a couple of months when I joined them. So the leadership was really good. I mentioned that 2 of the guys in one of the squads were, I think, from Chicago, some big city in the Midwest, and they both were gangbangers, motorcycle gangs. They didn't know each other, but they became as thick as fleas. I mean, they loved each other. They got out of the Army at about the same time. They had plans to get their bikes, and I'm glad I didn't live in that town, wherever it was, because they were darn good soldiers, and I'm sure they were hellions.
But having the discipline of the Army might have been a good thing for those guys.
It didn't hurt them any.
Yeah.
I remember I made one of the dumbest things I did on active duty. Rank promotion was really slow, and I got told that I was going to get a Spec 4, an E4 stripe that I could promote. And I thought about it, and this one guy from Chicago, I think Hurley was his name, and I decided he had just shown immense courage under fire, done some really good things. And I talked to some of my sergeants, and I decided I think I'm going to promote him. Well, a squad leader from another squad came and really advocated for his guy and reminded me about the trouble Hurley had been in, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I relented and promoted a good soldier who certainly deserved the promotion. But I didn't promote the guy who performed in combat. And I regretted that from the day that I put my signature on the paper and made it final on. I should have done that. But part of the pressure on us at the time was, because promotions were so slow, was, well, you want to promote this guy to sergeant. Remember, we're not going to be at war for long. Do you want this guy as a sergeant in peacetime? That was the kind of things were thrown up to us, because we didn't think we were going to be there very long.
That's right. This is just a little police operation. You go home.
That's right. You know, I'll be here a couple of years, but you know, do you want this guy as a sergeant in your platoon back home? And that was the kind of stuff. But I was wrong. I should have promoted Hurley, but I didn't. And I can still remember that issue.
All right. Now, and you had, in your original interview, you had covered your time as a staff officer in some depth, and you covered the range of kinds of things that you did, which at some point got down to, can you find the right beer for your general's mess?
Oh yes, as an aide.
Yeah,
yes.
That sort of thing. All kinds of different duties. Now, and we've got that covered in the original interview, so we're not going to go into that a whole lot right here. But now when did your first tour come to an end?
My tour ended in October. I deployed in October, came home in October of '66.
Yeah.
And just before I deployed, I got engaged. It took me 2 weeks after I met her to propose. Took her 2 more weeks to say yes. And we decided that, assuming that our relationship could stand the separation, we would do it. Came home, got married. Spent a little time with my family, went back, went through the drill. The biggest problem I faced was that when I had gone to Vietnam, I was a second lieutenant. and I was about 2 months from being promoted to captain. I wore my Army dress blues for my wedding, but all I had was second lieutenant bars for my blues. And I wasn't about to buy first lieutenant ones to wear once. And somebody suggested that I get some model airplane paint and paint those gold bars silver using a toothpick. And that was the biggest thing that I had to do. That and the advice that I got from a very wise man that I've passed on your wedding day, the only thing you have to do is get up and shine your shoes top and bottom. The top because you want them to look good, the bottom because you don't know what rascal may have painted on the bottom of those shoes. And that is the only time while you're kneeling at the altar anybody will ever look at the bottom of your shoes. And if you look at the bottom of your shoes, they don't look that good. So even if nobody has abused you, you want them as dark as you can get them just so that they don't look like the bottom of shoes. I've passed that advice on several other times, and I did follow it.
All right. Now, you're still in the Army at this point, so
Yes.
you're going to have a career there. So what assignment do you get now that you're back in the States?
Well, my original assignment when I was in Vietnam to come home, I was supposed to go to the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment at Fort Myer, Virginia, the caisson platoon, the honor guards. However, the Army was accelerating promotion at the time, and therefore I was coming up on 1 year in grade as a first lieutenant, and normally it took 3 years in grade to get promoted. But the Army had accelerated stuff so much, I was going to be promoted at 13 months. And the Old Guard didn't need captains, they needed lieutenants. So when I got to my fiance's house, which I'd listed as my leave address, there were orders telling me I was going to the 101st Airborne Division. And while I was a little disappointed, I wasn't much disappointed. I had spent some extra money buying an all-white dress uniform while I was in the Far East because I knew I'd need it for the Old Guard. I never did ever have it on, except when it was for fittings. But that was the biggest crisis. So my wife and I, we got married. We took a honeymoon and packed a trailer with all the goodies that we'd got and headed for Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was delighted to find out that I was in line to be a rifle company commander. I was made the executive officer for a month until I got promoted, at which time that company commander was going to move on to be the battalion staff.
All right. So you were made executive officer of the company that you were going to take over?
Yes.
Okay, and which one was that?
Company C, 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry, 2nd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division, Hua.
All right. What kind of reception did you get? You get there, how do they treat you when you show up?
Well, I reported to the reception center, and frankly, I asked the MP at the gate, where the heck do I go? I got orders to come here. And he said, the building over there, sir. And so I rolled in, and they said, okay, you're going to 2nd Brigade. You're going to be assigned to Company C. And so somebody from 2nd Brigade came and took me to 2nd Brigade, who took me to the battalion, who took me down to the company. And it was all very casual, and you know, we deal with replacements all the time, and we're glad you're here, and yada yada. And I felt accepted immediately. But at the time, there weren't very many people with combat experience, and the fact that I was coming in with combat experience made me quite welcome. And I was totally geeked. I mean, command of an airborne rifle company, and airborne is every infantryman's dream come true. And I hadn't even known to ask for it, and there it was. So my wife and I settled. We found an apartment in town. We were there 4 or 5 months until we get quarters on post, and we moved on.
Now, where in Kentucky is Fort Campbell?
Fort Campbell's right on the border of southern border. So the northern half of the post is in Kentucky, the southern half is in Tennessee. And indeed, we lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, which was 5 miles away.
Okay, and that's kind of what, north and west of Nashville, or?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The town in Kentucky is Hopkinsville, known affectionately as Hoptown. Hoptown is not really a city, it's more of a gathering place for soldiers. Clarksville, Tennessee is a real, quite a city, university, and all that stuff. But nice area, but very rural.
Now, when did you actually show up there?
We reported in December, just before Christmas
Okay.
of
66.
1966.
Yeah. Okay. Now, at this point, was there an expectation that the brigade was going to go to Vietnam?
Oh, no, not at all.
You had one brigade over there, right?
Yes.
That was one of, yeah.
And no, the division minus had no deployment expectations whatsoever.
Yeah. What sort of people did you have in your company?
This was during the draft, but you had to volunteer for airborne. So therefore, my soldiers were all volunteers. They were young, full of adrenaline, and we occasionally had trouble with getting them out of the drunk tanks and that sort of thing. But they worked hard, they played hard, they trained hard. We had a very good company.
Yeah. And what kind of just ethnic mix did you have in there?
Pretty solidly mixed. My first sergeant, First Sergeant Cook, was a black man, and when I took over the company, he was out on sick leave. I think he had yellow jaundice. I don't remember what it was, but so the senior platoon sergeant took over. He was the acting first sergeant. We did the thing, and I knew I had this first sergeant out there somewhere, but I'd never met him, didn't see him. And after I'd been there about a month, he showed up, back ready for duty, and he made an impression on me. One, he was very good shape, and two, the day we went out for our airborne run morning physical training, he ran circles around the company for the whole. So if I needed to be impressed, I was.
Yeah. And what about the soldiers? I mean, do you get kind of a mix of black soldiers
Yes.
in with the white ones?
Yep, there were Hispanic, black, white, north, south, some of them were from, Mexican, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, a real mix. And one of the things that the Army was both good and bad at is treating people like you are who you are. And there was one old axiom that all soldiers are green. And that's good, but it also ignores the fact that we are different based on how we were raised and who we are. And we were pretty good at forgetting that and not taking it into account back in those days. But everybody seemed to work well under it. I mean, I was not aware of any problems that were related racially at all within the company or within the division. There certainly were occasionally in town, that sort of thing. But a complete mix at all levels of rank. The number two, the major XO of our battalion was a black guy. The captain that I took over from was a black guy. Indeed, I remember when my first sergeant finally showed up and addressed the company, he announced that Captain Brooks, my predecessor, was now gone. So now there were two options for haircuts in our company. You get a white side wall or a black side wall.
Yeah. And the men themselves, but the enlisted men by and large are the kind of standard 18, 19-year-old for the most part. Because this is an era when, I guess, the first big drafts were in 1966. That was when a lot of guys getting called up. So you're now filling out the ranks of these units with a lot of those guys.
Yes.
Now, did you have a mix of people who'd been in the Army rather longer? A few of the NCOs. Do you have?
Yeah. The NCO, it was sort of an ideal situation. Well, we didn't have all the rank we might have wanted. We had, most of the soldiers were at the right rank, and most of them had not been rush promoted yet. That was coming. So, yeah, when a soldier earned rank, it was typically there, at least eventually. So soldiers had time and grade. The typical guy who came in as a draftee, volunteered for airborne, we only would see him like 18 months, basic and everything coming first.
Yep.
He would leave as a PFC. Those that stayed in longer. So it was the Army, at least the promotion and experience system, like I'd like to see it be. It worked well.
All right. Now, you're commanding a company that's an active duty unit. You're not a training unit per
No.
se. But were you doing more training to keep them busy while you were there at Fort
Oh
Campbell?
yeah, we trained constantly out in the field. One of the things that being an aide did me well at is I realized what assets were available. And during my first couple of weeks of command, when I was learning where things were, I decided I wanted to go to see the maneuver area, and I requested a helicopter. Now, if I hadn't been an aide, it would never have occurred to me in 1,000 years. But I did, and I got a tour of I had a chance to see the whole thing from the air, which really helped. But we went out, I sent them out as platoons, I took them out as company, occasionally went out as a battalion. So we did a lot, when I say a lot of field training, we probably did 3-4 days a month, actually out in the field overnight, and rifle range and all that sort of stuff. So we were constantly, we didn't do a lot of practicing for parades, unless there was one coming.
All right. Now, were you integrating anything about sort of the Vietnam experience into what you were doing, or were you still just kind of training to go fight the Russians?
We were very much integrating Vietnam.
Okay.
We definitely did see that coming. The other thing to remember in this is that at this time, 101st Airborne was airborne, and the 82nd Airborne was airborne, and we were the strategic reserve for the U.S. military. So one or the other division was always on, or had a unit on, ready to go status. And typically it would be a battalion that would be ready to go in 24 hours and a company that was ready to go in like 3 hours. So we pulled our share of the rotation, but we had to stay a little bit higher drilled because we would have been the first ones in.
Right.
Should something happen, should we be the IRF, Immediate Reaction Force? I think that's what it was called.
Right. Now, were you said you still airborne? Are you airborne in the sense of jumping out of planes?
Yes.
They have not sort of made you air mobile yet.
No. Air mobile was still something that we could do, but everybody could do. About the time that I was going through Ranger School, the Army was developing the air mobile concept, which became the 1st Cav Division.
Right.
And so there were such things as that, and we had more helicopters than normal. But no, air mobile was just one of the things we did. We jumped out of airplanes. Hoo-ah. And that was good for me because I was afraid of heights. So that's one of the ways I learned how to control my fear of heights, by getting up there.
All right. Now, you were part of a reaction force. Now, did you get to react to something at some point?
No, I say
something.
no. Most of the time it was boom, go. We'd lined up on the parade field, grab all our stuff, jump in a truck and head to the airfield. And when we saw the parachute issue site locked up, we knew this was just a drill. And we did that one particular time. We had got a brand new commanding general who was a pain. And my battalion commander was a new battalion commander. He had been my tactical officer at West Point. He was the one whose example motivated me to go in infantry. So we were sitting out there in our trucks. Parachute issue was not open. And everybody was, it was a sunny day, so everybody was basically crashed. And the general came down and started jumping up and down and yelling at us, we should be training or cleaning our rifles. And my battalion commander got in his face and said, no sir, they wouldn't be here if their rifles weren't ready to go. Soldiers going into combat don't know when they're going to sleep next. They should be sleeping now. Leave them alone. And I was standing about 6 feet away and I thought I was going to die. I had never thought anybody would ever talk like that, but it worked. He was right, and he had the nerve to do it, and he did it.
So we have a lieutenant colonel telling off a major general?
Yes.
All right.
So that was an experience. The one time we did go somewhere was the Detroit riots.
Yeah. Hey, tell us about that.
It was right after our new battalion commander had taken over. It was less than a month. And we normally, on one, I think Friday morning a month, had what we called command reveille. Well, we went in an hour early and got announcements and promotions. And this was the Friday before the normal command reveille. And I got a phone call 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, and the charge of quarters on the phone said, "Captain, we have an alert. Come in." I made a mental note. I knew this was the new battalion commander, just seeing if we could do it. He was going to have command there, and he should have said readiness test, because alert means you're going somewhere. And so I made a mental note to chew him out, and got my stuff together and got in. And nope, he didn't need any chewing out. He had called it right. Our brigade had been selected to go to Detroit for the Detroit riot. I'd never been to Michigan before, so that was my first trip to the great state of Michigan. We didn't know what we were going to do. Probably a fourth of my men had combat experience in Vietnam, and a couple of the really older soldiers in Korea. But so I had some combat experience guys. They loaded us up on C-130s, and we flew into Selfridge Air Force Base, Air National Guard Base, outside of Detroit. And we got off the planes, and they didn't know what to do with us. So we dug in. I know what to do in combat. You get below the surface of the ground. Now, I'm not sure the Air Force was really pleased about us using shovels on their nice taxi areas. I mean, not the taxiways themselves, they're concrete. But we did. And after a while, they moved us, again, National Guard 2.5-ton trucks. Now, all this time, we haven't seen an angry person, okay? We haven't heard anything that's out of the place. But everybody knows Detroit's a bad place anyway. So we're driving through town, and it's like driving through downtown Grand Rapids. It's just a trip. You know, there's people out there and cars going by. And they put us in I think it was a junior high school, and it was one of the old-fashioned ones where the building, they take a whole city block. One end is the buildings, and the other end is a fenced-in playground. And my battalion was in that, and we basically moved into classrooms and blew air mattresses. And once we got settled down, I was given the mission of starting to run combat patrols around the neighborhood to see what was going on. So I had reinforced rifle platoons, flak jackets, fixed bayonets, loaded weapons, and we're going, well, the rioting was downtown and was spreading, I don't remember, but in two directions. And we were here, we were in the middle, it's sort of at the base of the V. There hadn't been any rioting there. So it was a residential area. The residents were so happy to see us, they couldn't believe it. My biggest problem was all the people that wanted to bring us food, the girls that wanted to flirt with my soldiers. So we're moving down the street, you know, ready to, and people are smiling, yelling, waving, honking horns, offering food. So it became pretty clear that we were not in too much danger, but we didn't know. The police were so overwhelmed that they weren't anywhere there wasn't problems, and there weren't problems here, so they weren't there. So we quickly established some positions, but one of the challenges was we were advised that bad guys are going to try to poison you. So here we are, all these GIs. I've got this stack of C rations, and I've got 8,000 local citizens bringing in food, candy, and steaks and chicken, and we've got to refuse it and eat C rations. That was not one of the easier things to do. We were constantly on patrol. When I say constantly on patrol, I don't mean 24/7, 365, but somebody was out all the time. Frankly, while in that area, the biggest problem I had, and it was a problem, was that chained-in park or playground. When my soldiers were off duty and they weren't sleeping, typically I had soldiers 3 deep on the inside of the fence and girls 5 deep on the outside of the fence. And I made for happy soldiers, but trying to keep that situation under control was a little bit of a challenge, but frankly, not one that I really bemoaned having.
Did you ever bump into any rioters?
Yes, well, not me personally. One night, middle of the night, somebody grabbed me and said, get down to the operations center. There's this power station we've heard the rioters are going to go for, and we've got to get there. So I threw a couple of platoons and some deuce and a halves, grabbed a Jeep, went roaring through the night, in the middle of the night, showed up at this power station. The National Guard had been there for a month. Oh, hi guys, you taking our place? And they left. So the right hand often didn't know what the left hand was doing because all the coordination that if you'd been there a month you'd have had done in a week, you don't have done. Now, what I did occasionally do, fairly regularly, I had fire teams, 4 or 5 guys riding shotgun on fire trucks. They ran into rioters. They were returning sniper fire most every day. But I can honestly say in the about 2 weeks we were there, I never saw an angry person. Or if they were angry, they weren't angry at me. You know, they might have been angry about things going on. My troops did. I ran in, in the district that I had responsibility for, there was one house fire. A lady overloaded her wall circuit. That was the only crisis that we had to deal with, that I had to deal with. Our soldiers, for the most part, did not confront rioters. When I say our, I mean mine. The National Guard sure did. And we certainly took a lot of pressure off of them by letting them do their thing. But the worst thing I had to do was court-martial a couple of guys for leaving the school because they were from the area or they had a girlfriend in the area, and they were disappeared for a day. When they came back, we court-martialed them. I didn't like having to do that, but I had to do it.
That's the rules. Yeah.
So, quite an experience. Then we loaded up and came home. But that was. I didn't like the idea of deploying American combat troops to shoot at Americans. I didn't like that. But
you didn't have anything like crowd control training either, did you?
Well, yeah, we had 15 minutes. I'm sure we went through a couple of drills, but no, we made rules that. Well, we did have a rule that only an officer could authorize shooting. And I don't think that applied if somebody was shooting at you. But other than that, and that a little bothered me because I sent my fire teams out under a sergeant. So there was no officer to authorize them to shoot. But I figured I had good sergeants that they knew the rules and they played by them.
Now, when was this? What time of year was this?
August of '67.
And then how much longer after that was it that that your brigade goes to Vietnam?
When we came back, the rumors started flying that we were going to deploy, the division minus. And it was probably another month before we were told formally that we were. Well, when that happened, the Army had a policy at the time that officers could be required to serve a second tour, but enlisted men would not be required to. So all the enlisted men in the 101st who had been to Vietnam, who didn't want to go back, were transferred to the 82nd Airborne Division. And all the guys in the 82nd who hadn't been were transferred to us as fillers. But we were still under strength. So the Army did a computer search and found every airborne qualified enlisted man anywhere in the world who hadn't been to Vietnam yet. And we got satellite communicators and bulldozer repairmen, and I got 20 or 25 of them, and we went out to the field for 3 weeks, did infantry training, changed their MOSs, made infantrymen of them, and deployed them to Vietnam. So we were struggling.
Now, what kind of attitude did those guys bring with them?
Shock. As a rule, they were in the Army. They'd volunteered for Airborne. I guess I'm not proud of the next thing that happened. The 173rd Airborne was in Vietnam, and there was a big fight. I cannot remember the name of the fight, but they were successful, but they took a lot of casualties. Well, we were the only source of airborne qualified replacements in the world because we had just sucked them all in. So every company had to give up a sergeant and 4 privates or something like that. I assure you I didn't send my best ones. And that effort helped the division shake off some of the people you were asking about. I apologized several times later to my friends in the 173rd, but I would do it again if I'd had to. Right. And then we sent advanced parties over with our gear. They went over by boat. I think I sent 1 officer and a dozen or so enlisted men who left about 4 weeks ahead of us.
One fellow that I interviewed a while back was sort of the new junior officer coming in to join them, so he was the guy who got to go on the boat.
Was that Gabe?
That was Gabe Hudson,
okay.
Yeah.
And then the day came, and the last 48 hours, I think we were all confined to post. My executive officer lived off post, so we offered our guest room to he and his wife. And we got on C-141s and took off. And it was a long flight. Our division commander, this is the one who had been yelling at us for sleeping, he had told us that when we get off the plane, we will have loaded weapons. The Air Force policy was, no, you won't. So we got to do some negotiating, and we worked it out so that at the last minute we issued magazines that were loaded. We kept them all stashed, and as you went out the door, we gave you one. You could stick it in your room, but you wouldn't chamber a round. So it took some serious negotiating with the Air Force while in flight. Of course, we had a lot of hours to do that, to figure out how we weren't going to get court-martialed for ignoring the general, and they weren't going to get court-martialed for, but it was eventually resolved.
Okay, now, but you're flying all the way across in military aircraft.
Yes.
So this is, and are you flying some equipment with you, or
yes.
is that, okay.
There's some equipment with us. The planes were configured much like airliner, but we had some of our equipment was on our planes, and some planes were just all equipment.
Right.
We had pre-shipped a lot of the stuff. We didn't take some stuff. We didn't take. We had 106 anti-tank recoilless rifles. We didn't take them. We didn't think we'd find any tanks over there. So it was all thought through. Yeah. We shipped Connex containers full of all kinds of supplies.
Right. And then how many stops did you have to make en route? Wow.
I want to say 3, but that's just a guess. Because I know we stopped on the West Coast. I know we stopped in Hawaii, and I think we stopped one other place. I think Japan, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And then where did you land in Vietnam?
We landed at Benoit Air Force Base, and I knew that area from my first tour, and they had trucks waiting for us, and the people, most replacements came in there, and the people at Benoit weren't too wild about us having loaded weapons either. On the flight line, you know, when you get out by the perimeter, that's different, but frankly, it was probably a smart move because it certainly set the attitude. I can ridicule the issue and all the trouble it caused, but frankly, it probably was a good idea. And we stayed there that night, and the next day we moved to a base camp that I don't know who had established.
Remember what it was called? Or did you not stay there very long?
We were one place, and then we moved over to Cu Chi.
Okay.
And Cu Chi is where we stayed for several weeks. And we did some operations there. We started pulling some things, and that's when it became apparent that Tet 68, something was going on.
Okay. So when had you landed? in
We
Vietnam?
landed, I want to say right before Christmas,
Okay.
a day or two before Christmas.
Okay, so December '67, and then Tet starts at the very end of January
Yes.
in '68.
And while Tet really did catch everybody by surprise,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of indication that there's some problems in I Corps, the northern
Mm-hmm.
piece. And so one day it was boom, our brigade was just pulled and moved. We flew into what was called LZ El Paso. It became Camp Eagle right
Mm-hmm.
outside of Hue, near Phu Bai.
Okay.
And we landed at Phu Bai, moved out to El Paso, basically started setting up, and we were just conducting operations. And then the Tet ceasefire came. So we basically, everybody ceasefire, stay home, get a little rest, whatever. One of our staff officers, probably the battalion S2, was in a light helicopter flying somewhere around the city of Hue when he took fire and was nearly shot down. He was not shot down or hurt, but scared. And nobody could figure out what it was. Well, it was that Hue had been taken by the North Vietnamese, and we didn't know that. What we did then. And all of a sudden, it was a whole new ball game.
Mm-hmm.
And that introduced some of the most intense fighting I have ever, or wish to ever again. The Marines had responsibility for I Corps, and the areas that they had control of, they really did have good control of. You can't be everywhere and do everything,
Mm-hmm.
and the Vietnamese had figured out where they were and where they weren't. But there was a large, when I say wooded, it really more, not too many trees, but lots of
Your
bamboo
yeah.
and undergrowth, maybe a mile and a half north of the city of Hue on the main highway, Highway 1.
Mm-hmm.
They had an OCS set up in there. They had been there so long that they had, supply rooms,
Mm-hmm.
packs that they issued to trainees, with 3 pencils this way and
Mm-hmm.
2 handkerchiefs. They had been running an officer training school there for the Viet Cong, and we fought our way into that. And it was just amazing what we ran into, and the intensity of the fighting. The one part I can still relive is when we were fighting our way up to one of the walls of Hue. That was what my battalion's job was. And we fought our way into this one little village, and it got real quiet as we got into the village, which in one respect was normal because the enemy had withdrawn, they'd fled. But it wasn't usually that quiet. And then we got into we're talking about 80 steps here, not miles, this little village. All of the inhabitants, men, women, and children, had been lined up against the wall and machine gunned. And they were, the blood was still coming out of them. They were all dead. That was an incredible, I don't know what to call it, shock. We couldn't stop. We were in pursuit, other than having my medic make sure that there's nobody that we could help. The one other thing I distinctly remember was we had to attack across a big field, and it was a traditional World War II battalion frontal attack. 2 companies up, 1 company back. Mine was one of the companies that was up, and we got most of the way across before the enemy on the other side opened fire. You can edit this if you want to. A platoon sergeant in the other company that was attacking, I can't remember his name, but he was Hispanic, and he was the most popular sergeant. Everybody knew him, everybody liked him, very good soldier. But he had a very distinct accent and a very distinct way of talking. And we're halfway through the attack. We're starting to take fire, and all of a sudden you could hear across the whole battlefield, "Aye, my babies." He had been hit in a private spot by a dud grenade, rifle grenade. and he was on the ground, and the giggle that ran across the assault line was absolutely incredible. And I don't know how to relate that feeling, but it certainly was, everybody knew what had to have happened. I mean, we didn't know it was a dud rifle grenade, but it changed the tone of things a little bit. The fighting was still rather intense. But that was a frontal attack, and it went exactly like it should have. We swept in and did the whole thing.
So was their fire not terribly accurate coming at you, or?
It was not terribly accurate. And it may have been that once they saw how many of us, they started pulling out. I don't know. There were still plenty of them there when we got over there, but maybe not as many as there had been. However, once we got that area secured, then we started patrolling the area that we weren't physically occupying, and we found out they had a lot of spider holes. So there were a bunch of them. I don't know what a bunch amounts to, a dozen or so, that were still there ready to fight. I had a number of people killed by, where did the shot come from? I don't know. I remember one guy went down, and the guys with him started spraying treetops, so they figured it was a sniper, when in fact the person was in a spider hole. So it was very intense. That night it rained intensely bad, and we were starting to take rocket fire. I can remember that what happened was where we were dug in was a place where somebody else had been dug in, probably the Vietnamese, but I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. A trench and a foxhole is a trench and a foxhole. And I heard this rocket coming in, and all of a sudden it sounded like a big Slurpee. And what apparently had happened, I guessed, and it turned out I was a good guess, the rocket had landed in a trench that was so full of mud that it didn't go off. It just down the trench until it ran out of steam and just sat there. I called that into battalion headquarters because I was up and didn't have anything else to do. I mean, the fact that something came in was irrelevant. Of course we were taking fire. And somebody at the other end said, "Would you go confirm how big that rocket was?" And I remember asking, "You want me to get out of my foxhole while we're getting incoming, go find a dud rocket in a trench, and use a light to find out how big it is? That's what you want me to do?" Yes. No. And that, I'm sure some PFC radio operator was just doing his thing. If somebody reports something, get all the details. I mean, nothing ever came of it, but those are the kind of silly things that did happen while people were dying. Right after that frontal attack, we probably lost 8 to 10 of my 110 soldiers. One of the soldiers, E6, Sergeant Mosley, black man, and he had a very distinctive pattern of white on the palms of his hands. And I remember walking by where the medics had established our morgue, if you will, till they could be evacuated, and his hand was sticking out from under the poncho that was covering his body. And I can still feel that emotional shock because he was a heck of a good sergeant. I really liked him. The other people who died that day, I don't know, but I can still say Mosley's name.
How long did this go on?
That attack, the actual attack probably lasted about a half hour. The cleanup lasted the rest of the day. That night was the mortar was the incoming, but the totality of fighting from the time we started fighting our way up to the way until we got there was probably most of a week. It was 4, 5, 6 days. Apparently, about the time we got up to one of the 4 walls, the city way is square. We did control our wall, our side on the outside. And apparently, other units were doing the same thing on the other sides. I didn't know, but logical conclusion. Because the intensity of the fighting really slowed down. there's occasional sniper, occasional this, occasional that. But the last day or so was pretty mundane. And we also got resupplies, and we got all kinds, to include the Stars and Stripes. We got a newspaper. And the headline on the newspaper was, Marines retake way. And boy, were we hooting about that. But they did actually go in and retake the inside of the city, but we didn't think that counted because we took the outside.
Right.
But,
now, what did they do with you then at that point? You kind of physically secured the city, or were there still holdouts in parts of the city at that point, or?
probably, but that the Marines who,
Yeah.
who had taken the city itself, retaken it.
Right.
That was their issue. They handled it. At that point, they moved us. There were a series of fire bases to the north of the city of Way, where we moved and started running combat patrols out of those. Ultimately, we ended up at Camp Evans, which was a base I think the Marines had established.
Originally, yeah. I mean, it was also one that had first cav in it at times,
Yes.
and so forth. But
And it was quite full when they decided to move our battalion there. So we had to basically set up on the outside of the camp. And we decided, I don't know who we is, that we would set up just outside the camp was their trash dump. So they decided we would set up around the trash dump, which was interesting because we found more supplies in the trash dump than we could get through our supply system. I mean, this was the rainy season. We got rain suits, we got slings for rifles. I mean, my first sergeant always had a crew digging through the trash that Marines of the 1st Cav or whoever had been there. We had very good, well, when there was chow, there was chow. One day, a helicopter had gone offshore and found a supply ship that was supposed to dock in the Way area, but couldn't, obviously, the fighting was going. But they had sailed from the States, and they had, well, it was a refrigerated thing. They were full of steaks, among other things. So they just landed on the deck, and, well, they didn't know what to do, so they just gave him all the steaks he wanted. So he landed and we were glad to have him. And of course, the cook, the mess teams hadn't had a chance to cook anything when you don't cook sea rations. So we had one day where for 3 meals, steaks, not steak and anything, just steak. How many do you want? You know, you got them one at a time, but you could go back as often as you wanted. Steak and steak. And if you want salt, there's some in your sea ration packet. That was a funny time. Our supply officer had a great deal of fun with kidding everybody about that. So there were these funny things that happened. The fighting was, when we went out, it was wildly intense. For a while there'd be nothing, and then there'd be who knows what. There was one hill that the enemy was, I was told, had occupied. We occasionally got patrols up there. Sometimes they had a lot of contact, sometimes not any. Again, a funny story I remember was my company had just come in, so we had a day off. And another company was out on patrolling the area we'd just come in on. And I was in the Battalion Operations Center, and they noticed that the company, whatever it was, a company, whatever, was not moving very fast. And so they called him and asked him, what's going on? You know, having difficulties, and the answer was, we all have the Green Apple Quick Step. So every bush had a soldier behind it at the moment. The decision was maybe they should bring them in and let somebody go out who would be a little more combat ready. Don't know what caused it, but again, that's just one of the funny things that I guess your mind's pretty good at sorting things out. But
now, in this sector, you're up fairly close to the DMZ. Are you fighting north of Vietnamese regulars now?
yes.
All right. Now, would you see much of them, or would they just fire at you from places where you don't see them?
Usually we didn't see them. There was one time when we were working along a river. I can't remember where the river was, but it wasn't that far from Way. And we flushed a whole bunch of them. We had fighting most of that day, and then they were gone. And the next day we were working along a river, and it was, the river was here, we were moving along it, and there was as often was the case, there would be irrigation ditches they'd lead out in the, well, there's a big wide irrigation ditch and then a village. And as we approached the irrigation ditch, we came under really intense fire. And fortunately, I was able to get some Air Force or Marine air on them, which helped. But we still had to go in and take that city. And there was a little land bridge, and so I got a squad across the land bridge, and they were taking a lot of fire. I mean, just an incredible amount of fire. They were starting to take casualties. One guy was hurt so bad that we didn't know what we were going to do with him. I sacrificed my one item of comfort. I got up to them with my air mattress, blew it up, put the guy on the air mattress, floated him down the river to where we can get him in a medevac. I never did get another air mattress. That really honked me off, but I was glad that I had it for that situation. Ultimately, we fought our way into the town. The airstrikes are what made the difference for us. There were a lot of people there, all of them claiming to be just villagers, but some of them obviously weren't. So we had to do a lot of things. We identified one guy who, I don't know what you call it, instinct or whatever. Clearly he was not Joe, average citizen. And it was pretty clear to me and everybody else that he just was not cooperating. We had a Vietnamese interpreter with us who was doing the questioning, and I don't remember, one of my officers was overseeing it, and he just was being non-cooperative. And I was going to take my guys into the next village, and I wanted to know what he knew. And he was just being non-cooperative, and I walked up alongside the issue, and I announced fire in the hole, which military parlance means an explosion's been off. And I fired a 45 round right next to his foot. I missed it by about an inch on purpose. It hit right where I wanted. And he started talking. And I was rather pleased with that as a solution. Whether we got everything we would have or not, I don't know. But I was very annoyed that I was going to put my troops at risk, and this guy knew something and I needed it. Yet he claimed he was a friendly. I don't have any recollection of what happened to him after that. I'm sure he was turned over to the South Vietnamese people. But we did get some information, and we did, sure enough, move into a fight with enemy about where we expected him. After that fight, I remember that there just wasn't anything going on. And we were next to a river, and the guys were nasty. And I told half the company, go swimming. Everybody else, you're on guard when they're done. And I can remember a bunch of naked soldiers jumping into the river for a 15-minute. Glad I did it, but it was a funny sight.
Yeah, in general, I mean, what was morale like in the company at this point? How were the soldiers holding up?
Pretty darn good. The one thing that I noticed was that out in the field, morale was good. If there was a problem, it was when we were in garrison. Sitting in a bunker at night, which has never been hit and isn't going to get hit, but you've got to be alert. That could cause issues. I never really had much issues personally in my own company because we rarely did that. When we were pulling security, it was in a fire base which had been hit. And we'd gotten fired at the night before. And if nobody shot at you that night, that was a good thing. That was not something to gripe about. So typically I did not have those kind of problems, and nobody in my battalion did. But I was aware that there were problems like that, but I don't know of people that had problems out on patrol, out in the fighting. The last operation was when we got off the plain next to the South China Sea, started moving up into the mountains. They were really well dug in on certain mountains, reasonably enough. You can't be everywhere. And it was really hard to dig in on because there was not really good soil up there. And again, a mountain, when you're standing on the seashore looking at it, isn't a mountain compared to the Rockies, but it works. And there was one night that my company was occupying a ridge top, and there was so much enemy activity down below us that it was just amazing. I mean, we were shooting up all our ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't taking very much accurate fire, but we were getting an awful lot of fire. And I remember I had a C-123 gunship up for a couple of hours, just spraying the area.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day, wasn't anybody there.
Mm-hmm.
The next night, it was like that again. And except we started taking casualties that night. And we had choppers coming in to resupply and take out wounded. There weren't that many wounded, but a few that we had. I had helped carry a wounded guy onto a plane, onto a chopper, and I was just walking away from it, going back to my command post. And somebody who had carried another wounded guy in and was just running through the dark hit me and knocked me. I played football, okay? I have never been hit that hard. Of course, unexpected too. And indeed, I had to be evacuated the next day because I couldn't move much below the waist. I was ultimately fine. But that really, out of nowhere, in the dark, I mean, and it was totally innocent.
Then you rejoined the company after that?
No, I didn't.
Okay, what happens next?
I had been a company commander in country. I commanded the company for a year in Campbell. I've been a company commander in country about 4 months. And I guess they decided that 16 months command was enough, and they moved another guy in to take it over. Ultimately, they decided to send me to division, but en route, I didn't need to be at division for like 2 weeks, but we were being attached to another brigade. My battalion was, so they sent me as the liaison officer to that brigade for the 2 weeks, and then I would go to division. And I think it was our 3rd Brigade, but I don't remember. It was in the 101st Airborne, so it had to be the 3rd Brigade. And they were fighting up one of the valleys that led into Way, a big one. I can't remember the name of it. And incredible contact. And I remember the brigade commander, who was just a wonderful colonel. I mean, not to put down any other colonels I've worked for, but his concern and his knowledge and everything. And this general that we had, our new division commander, who had been giving us some trouble, the brigade commander was talking to him on the phone while I was there, talking on the radio. And what's going on in the fighting, because it was very intense fighting. He said, well, X battalion, whatever it was in contact, and they're still in contact. Well, what's the results? Well, right now we've got 12 wounded soldiers, 1 dead. I'm making this up, I don't remember. But it was not horrible, but it wasn't good. Well, how about the enemy? Well, I think there's 4 identified. At this point, we're still fighting. And the general said, that's not good enough. You will have killed more of them. And the colonel, how many should we have killed by now, sir? And he came up with a number, 26. Said, then we have 26 enemy dead. And that really shocked me. And apparently that was this general was going to make his name by having the most enemy killed reported. Well, I did my thing, reported to division, the G3 shop, operations, where I was given responsibility to be the night duty officer for the operations. And that was cool. I'll do anything, and that was fine with me. And about a month after I took over that position, our commanding general was relieved. And another general came in who happened to have been the other assistant division commander in the 1st Infantry Division where I was an aide, General Mel Zace. And he had just gotten his 2nd star and was made the commander. And he not talking to me, just me, but he told all of us that rumor had it that some of the reports were not accurate, and they would be corrected. Well, since I was night duty officer, and 3/4 of the time I had nothing to do, I was given the job by the G3. So I was getting back in touch with people who had fought in different battles. You had been the operations officer for this battalion. What really happened.
Yeah.
I have never been prouder of doing anything in my life than correcting battles, because I went back and read reports of battles I had fought and found everything padded. So Mother Army came through in the integrity issue there.
Yeah, I mean, so it is one of these features of the war. There are situations where, for different reasons, there were people making, and there's a lot of accounts of officers having to, people knowing we killed X, but then the report says that it was this number instead. Or in one case, you had, sort of air, naval, and ground forces all involved, and there was a body count of 82, and each branch of the service was credited with the 82, which made the 240. You get those, but then there's this other stuff on the other side. I mean, it wasn't a consistent thing, and among other things, it's not terribly good military practice to make stuff up, because that can give you a deceptive idea of what was really going on, and on some level, if you're going to operate effectively, you better know what you're doing. Yeah, so you had that sort of thing. So this kind of thing goes on, and we tend not to know that, you're actually correcting it. And then on the other hand, once we got into Vietnamese records and so forth, we find that in a lot of these operations, their total casualties wound up being pretty high anyway.
Yes.
Maybe not necessarily always exactly in the same places and for the same causes, but we couldn't they were so good at taking away their own losses that in a lot of cases we had to guess, we didn't even know.
Yes.
And that's all part of that too. As a sort of night duty officer, what were your duties?
Well, when a unit was in action, if I was still a company commander and I got in action, I'd report to my battalion, they'd report to brigade would report to division, so the division knew what was going on. So while we had radio operators, my job was to keep track of what was going on in the division area in the way of action. Yes, I knew that this company was patrolling there and that company, but I knew what the sectors were.
Right.
So sometimes there was action and sometimes there wasn't. The action didn't last forever, if there was. So just keeping track of things. One of the funnier things that happened was that the division just had gotten a new aviation officer, division aviation officer. Well, he had come from being one of the very senior general's personal pilot. Well, that senior general, because they had the prerogative, at least they did then, had decided, since he was going to be flying a lot, he wanted to go get his own wings so he could fly himself, and he did. But the condition was, and this is still the case, you can fly, but you have to fly with an instructor pilot all the time. Well, the general was getting ready to fly, and instructor pilot showed up, found the general already in the airplane, ready to fly. And instructor pilot presumed he had pre-flighted it, but the instructor pilot pre-flighted it anyway. And the general said, something wrong with the pedals. And what the pedals do is affect the pitch of the tail rotor. He said, they're stiff. Well, now this is my new friend, the new division aviation officer. He said, I said, General, take both your feet off the pedals. Okay. Now put one foot on the pedal. Boom. He was so stiff that the pedals resisted each other. One was down, one. So that was his funny story about new pilots of regardless how many stars. But so there was some of that shooting the bull going on. But for the most part, it was keeping track, following up with things, making sure that we knew, so that when we briefed the day shift and the generals and everybody when they came in, that we knew exactly what had happened during the night, whether it was nothing or lots of things or potential things, also to include what activities the subordinate units had planned for the next day. And because I worked at night, slept during the day, or didn't work during the day, anytime they needed to send somebody somewhere during the day, I was the guy who was one of the guys who could be sent off to do liaison research, whatever. So I had a few of those kind of jobs too. I remember we were taking some fire, rocket fire, at Camp Eagle at the time, which was not uncommon, occasional something here or there. It wasn't intense. And I was coming out of something, and I was just stepped out into the street, and this Jeep went by at like Mach 3, and I remember yelling at them to slow down. They were taking an injured guy to the aid station. So I later on got to go to apologize to them. They were doing exactly the right thing, but obviously speeding was not a good thing as a general rule. But that was a time of, again, learning. As an aide, I watched the division from the general's perspective. Now I was watching it from the worker bees at the division level. And that, again, was incredibly insightful because I just didn't know.
Yeah. Now that sort of rest of '68 there, that whole kind of after Tet period, that's when there's an awful lot of fighting going on in different places.
Yes.
And so with some of those nights when you're on duty, there's going to be a fair amount of things going on.
Yes.
Was it a challenge to maintain clear lines of communication? And in some cases, and it may be more in battles that go on during the day, but you have reports of situations where everybody's on the radio net at the same time, including several layers of command, all trying to talk to each other.
We tried to avoid doing that. I worked with, there are 5 major subordinate commands of the division, 3 brigades, division artillery, and the support command. Well, the support command was out delivering first aid and supplies. The division artillery was just responding to the brigade. So I really only had 3 brigades I had to worry about. And typically, if you were one of the brigade operations officer, I'd call you. I would not bother your battalions or your companies. Now you might, but I didn't. So therefore, and those brigades didn't move, or they didn't move much, or if they moved, we knew they were moving. So typically, I didn't have any problem. I might have to brief everybody. The 3rd Brigade isn't sure what they're doing, or what happened, or whatever, because this battalion still hasn't reported back, whatever. But no, all I had to do was talk to the brigades. Now, when I was doing the numbers correction, I was calling beyond that. But as far as one of the things we absolutely did not do was interfere in comms with anybody ever. I would never, ever have called a battalion or a company for anything unless it was the brigade told me I could, which I don't think they ever did. So no, that was not an issue. And typically, even as a platoon leader, there was not much of a problem. I had a platoon net, which usually didn't work, so typically we were all on the company net. But that meant everything, the traffic was all the company.
Right.
I never heard a battalion on that. So usually no. I certainly can't say never, but typically that was not an issue. And the issue of combat being supervised by the White House, well, Johnson was picking the targets for airstrikes in North Vietnam at the time, personally, but at least on the ground he was leaving us alone.
Yeah, I guess the problem that will come up that I've run into periodically is, particularly in the day, you'll have different commanders up in their helicopters over a battlefield, so you'll have the battalion commander and the brigade commander and maybe a staff officer, maybe the division commander, and sometimes one of those guys up in the helicopter would actually radio directly down to a company commander and start telling him what to do.
Well, when I was an aide, my assistant division commander was always over anything going on. And I certainly cannot tell you he didn't do that. My job is to keep the radios going, and when he wanted to talk to somebody, to get it for him. But I don't remember him going down to that. I'm not saying he didn't. I just don't have a recollection of that. But I certainly couldn't tell you he didn't or that he wouldn't, because we were smack dab in the middle of most things.
All right. Now, when you were in this staff position now, you mentioned you got various kinds of special assignments. I mean, where would they send you? Or aside from the numbers counting thing, what other kind of stuff did you do for them?
Oh, if we were going to be working, another division was going to be working alongside us and somebody needed to go over and do a little face-to-face liaison, or as often happened, another brigade was assigned to our division. Somebody needed to go down a little face-to-face. It was nothing particularly exciting or memorable. The only thing that annoyed me was that I was losing a whole lot of sleep. Because while I was a lot younger, sleep was still pretty valuable.
Right.
And I sure didn't sleep on duty. And I didn't want to be sleepy on duty. But besides that, it was mundane, paper shuffler kind of stuff.
Okay. Now, did you have a reasonable feel, though, for sort of how the fighting was going in your division at that point, or what progress you were making or not making?
I think so, because I had been on the ground. You know, when somebody said, this is happening, I could pretty much picture it. I'd been on a lot of the turf myself, or at least flown over it. So, yeah, I think we had a pretty good sense of it. Again, the only place we were moving a lot was up a particular big valley. So, and that was hard fighting, and we knew it was, so that was sort of predictable. So there were all the goofy things that went on, airstrikes that went on in the wrong place, all that kind of stuff. But we weren't dealing with, I don't remember situations where we were really in, feeling like things were out of control. I don't remember that at all.
Now, so how long did you have this job, or when did you finish that?
Oh, wow. I went home in November.
Okay.
End of November. So
All right.
I got home almost a month early
Right.
from a year's term.
Now, but as you got into the fall there and so forth, did you have a sense that things were quieting down, or was there still more? Was activity fairly constant much of the time?
I think things were quieting down. My recollection is that we had to go further to find a fight.
Right.
Let's put it that way. There was still plenty of fight, but there wasn't around there. The area around where we were, not to say there was never fighting, but but it was not intense at all, and we had to go well to the west.
Up into the mountains.
Yes,
now,
up into the mountains
yeah,
to get a
right,
fight. We were
right.
doing it, but it was significant. We had to go hunt. We had to go find them.
Yeah, I mean that whole year, there had been in principle 3 successive enemy offensives over the course of '68. Each one kind of had less gas than the one before, and they took a lot of damage that year. And they're pretty much pulling back and licking wounds at that point and going back to where we can't get them.
Well, General Jopp said in his memoirs that at the end of Tet 68, he was seriously considering withdrawing to the north and giving up. Not surrendering, but giving up. It was the American press that convinced him he should stay in the war by declaring the Tet Offensive a victory for him.
Yeah. Well, it was a complicated military situation in a lot of ways, but ultimately you had all of these sort of larger political rules of the game governing what you could and could not do,
Yes.
which from the level of being in the Army yourself, that's got to be fairly frustrating.
Incredibly, certainly you need certain rules of combat, rules of fire, when you shoot, when you don't. But at some point, it's got to be go get them. And most of the time we had that, but there were times that we didn't, and it was very frustrating to, you can only do this, you can only, and just overall, the fact that the Ho Chi Minh Trail was off limits. We should have, that was a combat area. No, obviously we bombed it.
But given how they operated and how good they were at hiding things and all the caches and so
Cambodia
forth, they had,
and all that.
They could just go back, and they had the opportunity to recover and build up their strength again and sort of come back in, ultimately what they would do.
When I was an aide, one of the things my general decided he wanted to do was to see Cambodia. So we flew down along the river that was, and it had pretty heavy canopy, so we had to fly down that. And we started taking fire while we were flying along. And it was from the Cambodian side that we were taking fire. So there isn't doubt in my mind that that's where they were, and one of the deals in combat is you go where they are. And we sure didn't do that. Yes, that kind of thing was frustrating, but to a platoon leader on the ground, it didn't really affect. But to somebody who could see the bigger picture, it was very frustrating.
Now, in your divisional headquarters, did you have any South Vietnamese military liaisons or other people working with you?
Occasionally, not often. I do remember when I was an aide, the general had planned an offensive somewhere. And what he wanted to do was, I need to turn this off. What he wanted to do was to pick a fight. So he briefed all of the South Vietnamese people that what we were going to do was we were going to go over here, but, oh, by the way, this small convoy of, I think, bulldozers was going to go down this road to the Special Forces camp just to put some stuff there. Well, it wasn't a small convoy of bulldozers, it was an armored cavalry regiment, squadron, tanks and armored personnel carriers and everything. And we were hoping they would ambush it, and they did. And we had a whole division ready to respond when they attacked. And that was a deliberate use, figuring there certainly among all the South Vietnamese people we briefed, at least a couple of them had to be on the other side.
Right.
And they called that one right. At the 101st, no, that was not so much the case. We didn't work with Arvin very much just because they weren't around that much. So that was not that much of an issue. As a matter of fact, I don't have a single specific recollection of working with them at all. That doesn't mean we didn't.
Yep. All right. Now, I guess, let's see, I think actually we probably covered a lot of the sort of larger themes or issues or things that I'd kind of wanted to get in and make sure that we were including in this. But basically, you kind of, are there other things that stand out in your mind about that second tour in Vietnam? Things that tend to come back to you that you haven't brought into the story here yet?
You know, I remember that I made it a point that every evening, almost without exception, I wrote my wife. And she would write me. Obviously, I'd get 6 letters one day and none for the next 2 weeks. But that communication was really important to me and to her. My executive officer, who was also a very, very good friend, never wrote his wife, just because that's just his personality. He certainly loved his wife as much as I did, but as much as I did mine. But it just wasn't in him. So my wife's letters kept his wife advised on how he was doing. We talked to them a number of years later, visited with them. And yeah, he caught all kinds of trouble from Mama when he got home. But my first sergeant, that second tour, Sergeant Cook, the routine in my battalion was that the first sergeant stayed in the rear and pushed supplies and people. My first sergeant decided he was going to be forward, so he negotiated with my executive officer for him to stay in the back. And First Sergeant Cook was out in the field with me every single time, all the time, with backup radios, checking things. And while my XO was an absolutely first-class officer, he certainly didn't have the experience of a 20-something year, 1-year experience in Vietnam, first sergeant. And boy, did that keep me out of trouble. I mean, he checked in things I never would have thought about. Well, of course, he never was where I was. He was somewhere else in the company. And I remember just thinking how incredibly lucky I was that he wanted to do that. I can't remember any real specifics. Other things from that tour. No, nothing jumps out.
All right. So you get home, and now that was it for you in Vietnam at that point? Okay. Because after that, and we have this in sort of the rest of your interview. You go on to a career that lasts into the 80s, and therefore for quite some time after that. I guess one question I do have for you is, did you see changes going on in the Army or its culture or the attitudes of men in it in the period kind of there at the end of Vietnam and in the 70s. One of the stereotypes is that sort of one line that I've heard is we took a pretty good Army into Vietnam and wrecked it. Were there kind of some negative sides of things or morale issues in the Army back home in the 70s that you saw?
Well, one of the things we did in Vietnam was we accelerated promotions. If you were a college, high school graduate, and you either got drafted or joined the Army, you could have, if you scored high enough on a test, they'd offer you sergeant school. Nickname was Shake and Bake. You go there for I think 8 weeks, and you're an E5 sergeant. And if I got drafted the same day and didn't get it, you're a sergeant, I'm a private. But we know the same amount. Promotions went very fast. When I first was in the Army, it was 18 months to first lieutenant, 4 years to captain. It was a year to first lieutenant, a year to captain by the time it was over. So therefore, you were getting, we still had the rank there, but it didn't have the experience with it. And did that hurt us? Yeah. When the draft ended, that changed some of the things, but I went from Vietnam after a stop at graduate school and a stop at Armed Forces Staff College. I ended up in Germany, and yeah, we had issues with soldiers on drugs, soldiers not feeling like things were important. We had a lot of issues like that. One of the things we ran into regularly was, I think it was called Project 100,000, where they took 100,000 soldiers in who basically were basically uneducated, certainly no high school diplomas.
People who had failed the Army's aptitude tests normally would not have been taken.
Yes. And we had to take them and do something with them. Well, education was a good solution for those who wanted it. Some of them did want to do better, in which case the Army was a really good place for them. Others didn't. It was just something to do, and they were a serious problem. We did have gang issues and riots and race issues and everything you can imagine. Not in huge amounts, but enough of them to make things a little difficult. In the 3 years I was in Germany, that was always an issue that was coming up. I was the second in command of a battalion when I was in Germany, and I was asked by a soldier who said that he was going to be the honor graduate of his GED class if I would speak to them. One of the reasons was as XO, I didn't, oftentimes when the companies were out, I wasn't. I was the one behind making sure. So I would be there on the day. I said sure. And there were 40 soldiers who graduated, and I came in and gave a little talk. And I told a joke about generals. I did not know that the honor graduate was the general's driver, and the general had slipped into the back of the auditorium during my speech.
Oh.
All of the troops knew it, so I got one heck of a good laugh. And also got a little bit embarrassed. The general was a neat guy and made jest of it, but that was one of the things that I can still remember wondering. I knew it was a good joke. I didn't think it was that funny. You know? But yeah, Project 100,000 was a real.
So basically, you were talking about being in Germany. You mentioned that you wound up doing things like making a speech for guys who'd gotten their GEDs and made a joke about General, and General was right there and heard you. But he was cool with that, so
yeah,
you
sure.
were all right. Now, what years were you in Germany?
We went over there in 74, 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah,
3 years.
Kind of mid-70s era, and that may have been kind of a low point in certain ways. I think it was also a period when a lot of the people who'd had promotions among the officer ranks during Vietnam lost rank.
Well-
if they were, depending on how they'd gotten it, or battlefield commissions and things like that got undone.
Well, I do remember this. While I was in Germany on my second tour, working in G3, the Army had a promotion board for promotion to major. I was a captain. And traditionally what the Army has always done is whatever zone of rank they're considering, they take the next zone under it. It's called a 5% list. They take 5% of them for early promotion. Well, while I was over there, they took the next 5% list too, and I was picked up from that. So I was selected for promotion to major while I had 4 years service. Now, I wasn't promoted until I had about 5.5 years service. But the people that were promoted on the next list, that my promotion list lasted, like it should have, a little over a year. They're designed to last a year, year and a half, right in there. And mine did. The next one, which is the zone you're talking about, took 8 years to exhaust. So, and the one after that took almost as long. So I made major 10 years ahead of my peers because I was deep selected and promoted just as the promotion stopped.
Because you'd become an officer a little bit before they created a lot of extra officers.
Yes.
And so you're kind of a little bit ahead.
And yeah, there were officers who were reduced. I never got involved in that, so I only know that it happened. I know that I had one of my wife's cousins was required to retire or get out quite a bit earlier than he planned to, because the Army was downsizing and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that went on, but it didn't happen in my immediate life.
Okay. Let's see. I had a really good question just in my head a moment ago. Right. Now, I guess by the time you eventually retired, 86 or so, was there sort of another kind of cultural shift in the Army? Had you kind of worked your way through some of the whatever Vietnam hangover there might have been to get to a different level, or were you doing specialized enough stuff that might have been hard to tell?
You know, that's a really good question, because it is very well known that Vietnam veterans, when they came back, were abused. I wasn't. Now, I came back from Vietnam, went to Army schools, then went to Germany. I knew it was happening, but it never happened to me or to anybody around me. Now, I'm not saying that people might not have snubbed me or something, but I'm a big boy. You can, the worst thing you ever do is sneer at me or say something mean. I probably will make it without weeping. But I think my assignments sort of kept me away from that. My last assignment as the Army Advisor of the Michigan National Guard. The National Guard then was very different than it is now. It was really a general reserve for general war somewhere, and they did not expect to be deployed or activated or anything for any reason, and therefore the motivation and everything there was different. But it wasn't anything that was shocking or unexpected, because the Guard had been the Guard for a long, long time, and everybody knew that they were the weekend warriors, and there were really good units and not so good units, and everybody knew that too. And so I don't think I experienced much of the culture change. Or if I did, I didn't pay any attention to it. So, you know, having been a war planner and running our ROTC department in a very military-friendly town, I think maybe I was protected from that, but I was aware of it. I was aware of that stuff going on, but again, that's different than, you can be aware of it too. If you don't have to live it, it doesn't mean anything.
All right. And then as in more recent years, as the Army has gone back into action and so forth, first in the Gulf War, and then of course with Iraq and Afghanistan, how do you view the sort of the general public presentation of or response to kind of the military now, whether what you see in the media or just in the public and so forth? Is there a different attitude that you see are a better one than what we had
Yeah,
back in 1970?
I think, well, it's not a formal thing. I think most Vietnam vets have taken it upon themselves to make darn sure that never happens to anybody else. And while our country's not at war, our military's at war, America's at the mall, Washington's at lunch. What I have seen has convinced me that the next time we commit significant forces anywhere, we should require Congress to declare an act of war. And we should put the country on a war footing. One of the things I remind my students while I'm teaching them, on this day in 1943, we started rationing bread and or shoes or something like that. That was when the country was at war. And they don't have, I might as well be speaking Greek, they have no idea what any of that could possibly mean. I think our country needs to go to war, goes to war. Now, do I see our soldiers being treated well? For the most part, yes. On the other hand, there are certainly a good number of people in America who denigrate service, military service, or who think that doing anything that supports anything anybody in Washington wants to do must be evil. Okay, they're out there too. But the major issue that I see that bothers me today is the fact that the 1% in America is the 1% who will serve. And nobody else even thinks about it. It's not, serving our nation in the uniform is not something that normal people expect to do, or want their kids to do, or have any relationship to that. So the military is more isolated than ever before, because we're those strange people who are willing to go do that for whatever reason. And add to that the fact that because the military is so small, way too small for what we've been asked to do, the back-to-back tours are producing all kinds of things. I don't think we've begun to see PTSD. As you know, locally we've got the Wounded Warrior Project for brain injury. You can only explosions rattle your brain inside your head. You can only do that so many times before you start getting results. And back-to-back tours produce those. And as good as we are at taking care of things like that and preventive, I think we're going to start seeing more of that. And I think we're going to see that's going to be distancing the military more from the public, who's never had to go through that and just sees you as weird and different. So I think what the bad thing that I see is the separation of the at the mall public who thinks God made them special and that's why we have all these rights. And whatever those people are that go off and fight for it, we appreciate them, but they're weird.
Yeah, I mean, it has struck me now teaching at teaching college. You get a lot of soldiers coming in on GI Bill and coming in, and a lot of them will wind up, say, in my military history class, kind of a natural place to go. And they're very interested and so forth. They haven't told me I'm nuts or I'm talking through my hat, which is pretty good since I'm not a veteran. But it's pretty clear also that a lot of them say are not ready to do what you're doing right now. But also that they're carrying, a fair number of them are clearly carrying baggage with them. And in a lot of cases, they've had more than one tour.
Yes.
You know, they've got that going back again and back again. And when I'm trying to talk people into signing up and do an interview, I'll get some, say, who were never maybe in combat or whatever, they were between wars or things like that. Oh, I don't have anything to say. And I said, well, these days so few people proportionally are in the military or even have a family member in the military that they really just don't know what that life is like. And among other things, when they see you tell your story, you become people again. So that's a piece of what we're doing here, is just trying to at least have those lines of communications open. And when it comes down to a question, when you meet a veteran, in some cases, even the now popular line of "thank you for your service" can create a touchy reaction. Most appreciate it, some might necessarily not. You don't really know, but I guess just talking to them and listening to them, that you can do. And that certainly is what we're trying to do. And so I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for coming in and finishing your story for us. So now we have the whole thing.
Cool.
All right.
Jim, thank you.
Okay.
I never never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.